hi to all. Mike Haggerty here, alongside with my good buddy Mike Clayton for our Heads Up podcast. And I think we've got a great treat for you guys for this particular broadcast. I'm really excited. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us those introductions. So why don't you tee it up? You've worked with these ladies in the past, so give us what you got.
Thanks, Coach. How privileged are we when we get a chance to talk with Joan Fulp and Andrea Yamamoto, not just leaders in our women's movement, but leaders in the sport of wrestling as a whole. And just so excited to have them on today. We had them on about 2 years ago when we were doing Moments Off the Mat during COVID. And we talked a lot about why women's wrestling and why people should get on board. And I even remember, Joan, you said 2 years ago how explosive the growth had been in the 2 years prior to that. And so I think it'd be fun to just kind of pick up to talk about where that growth has been in the last 2 years. And instead of talking about why women's wrestling, because we get it now we need to talk a little bit more about how. And so I'd love to throw that back. Let's talk about that new growth in the last 2 years that we've seen from a lot of your efforts.
Well, where do we want to start, Andrea? I mean, the growth has been exponentially amazing. We're still seeing right now growth states that are doubling. States that are just saying yes to girls wrestling in this past 12 months are seeing numbers double. Several states now moving over 1,000 into 1,500 into 2,000. So we are so excited to see what the growth will look like in January. Usually we get all those numbers. They're pretty solid by mid-January to the end of January when we look at the hydration numbers. But the growth, again, has just been amazing. And within USA Wrestling, I don't have those pulled up really fast. I could do that, in another minute or two. But I think from last year's numbers at the end of November to this year, I hate to try to recall what I said a week ago, but I think we're up 30% on those numbers.
Wow.
So, I know in female coaches from 21 to 22, we were over 33% in growth. So in just the female coaches.
Right. So numbers both across the board, all age groups with USA Wrestling, as well as the high school numbers, just expanding so rapidly.
Why?
Gosh, the door's open. This morning I kept trying to write like 4 things. It turned into about 7 things, but I can continue to say the welcome mat has become more and more visible, and it needs to still be more visible. That door needs to swing wide open so the girls know that they are welcome to walk in. It's not just the WE. Well, maybe, what does that mean? We, just the guys, who's welcome to walk in this room. So the visibility has to be there, and the more visible we are, and we know social media is just like a rushing river of social media. So that continues to help the growth, as well as all these wonderful grassroots parents, coaches, administrators who have said yes to girls wrestling. And I'm going to take this moment right now. I got an email about a week or so ago from an administrator at a state level that I connected with probably in 2018. And here's what he wrote. And I'll try to do this without getting emotional, because it's gosh, it just
let's
hits
get
here.
emotional.
Let's get emotional.
Let's get
Yeah,
emotional.
right? Like with the reindeer ears on and Happy Christmas.
It's wrestling. Let's be emotional.
He said, I cannot adequately express my excitement for how much girls wrestling has exploded in our state, and how proud I am of our coaches for making these young ladies feel wanted and needed. There is no doubt that implementing girls wrestling has had a positive impact on our state's boys wrestling numbers, as those have increased as well. So I think that says it in a nutshell. Andrea and I, we said it a long time ago. The way to grow wrestling is right in front of you. It's girls wrestling, and girls wrestling is having an impact.
Whether or not whoever that was, if it wasn't my good friend Greg Stahl in Missouri, that sounds like Greg Stahl. That sounded a lot like Greg. So
that was,
and
Greg's
I'm not gonna. You don't even.
I'll tell it. It was Greg. So
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That is so cool. But because I could hear him saying that, and you
yeah,
said 2018, and I have seen what has happened in the state of Missouri, and
yeah,
it is just absolutely phenomenal.
yeah,
So yeah, that didn't surprise me that that would have been something that Greg, and he's such a good person. He's always giving praise to other folks. So kudos to
right.
Greg. But and again, the numbers are absolutely incredible that we're seeing this explosion. But from a coaching perspective, my first question would be, what is it right now? And Joan, you said that the doors were opened, right? But what beyond that is so attractive to the women that this is, it's gotten to the point where we're at today with the numbers where they're at. Why so many women are so attracted to this sport?
Well, I'm going to just open the door for Andrea. Andrea's always said girls want to do combat sports. So hit it, Andrea.
Yeah, we girls and women want access to all sports. And we especially want access to combat sports. So it's natural for us to want to try a sport. It's to participate, to be on a team, to learn skills, and then to compete. And so we always just want the opportunity to do any sport. Then given the chance to be on a team and compete, we want that. And then for, a significant portion of girls and women, we want to excel in the sport, whatever it is. But I think what is so special about wrestling, and I hope that this is one of the things that's attractive about our sport to girls and women, is that there really is a place for every girl. Doesn't matter how tall you are. Doesn't matter if you're short. Doesn't matter what kind of frame you have. It doesn't matter if you're on the lower end of the weights, of the scale at 99 or 100 pounds. If in high school, if I'm a girl that weighs 235 pounds, there's a place for me. For a lot of these girls, particularly over 155 pounds, who's recruiting them for sports? Is cross country recruiting them? Is volleyball recruiting them? Is basketball recruiting them? If I'm 190 pounds and I'm 5'6", who's asking me to come out for their sport? Well, we are. We might actually be the only sport that is looking to those kinds of girls and saying, you're perfect for our sport and we want you and we really, really hope that you come and join us. And then when they do, they're getting the same kind of sense of value that a girl in cross country does, that a high jumper does, that a volleyball player does. And I think for so many girls, this might actually be the first positive sport experience that they've ever had, because we're saying that you exactly as you are is perfect for us. And so then I think a lot of girls are just realizing that wrestling's really fun. It's really challenging. I think there's some multi-sport athletes that are finding wrestling and saying, oh my gosh, I thought I was so, maybe competitive or, at the top of my game in my other sport. But now that I'm getting into wrestling, I realize there's so much more. And they're finding a really good place to compete in, in a combat sport that asks everything of us. And I think they love being on a team. Who wouldn't want to be on the craziest girl squad team that wrestling is? We're the best crazy people you'll ever meet. And I think there's a lot of across the nation right now. We're still looking at first girls team. So it's really a special, historic, and pioneering moment for those individual girls, for them as a team, for their school. They are doing something that has never been done in their school or in their wrestling program before. So there's a lot of energy and excitement with that. And those girls are very energized, and they are reaching and recruiting more and more and more girls to turn out for the sport, because they are really motivated right now. They're really enthusiastic. Mike shared a video this morning of a girl saying how she got into wrestling and why. And it really was just, these other girls trying to, to pull her in and say, you got to join, you got to join, you got to join. So, the girls really are taking the momentum right now. And I think that that's one of the most exciting things about girls high school wrestling to me is we have this whole nation now of first-time girls wrestlers that are so excited. They have fallen in love with the sport, and they are now our best recruiters and our best spokespeople for joining the sport of wrestling right now, and including kind of what Joan was touching on with those same girls are helping to get boys that never were going to look at our sport to join. And I think that's kind of what we have always known. We've always known it in our hearts. And we needed to put it into practice to see what we believed actually become fact. And so I'm really glad to hear that Greg is seeing, the whole picture of, what many of us have realized was going to be good, not just for girls and women, but was going to be good for boys and men as well.
Joan, you'd mentioned welcomed and needed, and that these girls are doing the outreach to other girls to get them to come out for the sport. If I'm the coach, I'm in the room, what kind of an environment do I need to be creating so that when these young ladies come into that room, they feel safe and welcome and needed? What are those ingredients for me as a coach that what have you seen that's working?
Mike, did you say my name on that?
Yeah, you
just throw that out to both. I missed that. I wasn't
to anybody, what's working? What's working in getting more women into the room and letting them know that they have us. One of our coaches in Missouri talked about this girl just came into the room and he said, "Hey, you're new." She said, "I heard this was a safe place."
That's super. That's really positive to hear from any sport, that this is a safe, let alone wrestling. Andrea and I've talked for so many years, and I think one of the things, and as I looked at talking about some of the topics you mentioned today, Mike, I kept going back to building wrestling as a whole. Even though we're talking about growing girls and bringing girls into this room, making it a safe place, making that welcome mat really visible, what is it? Because retention has always been a challenge in wrestling. So one of the comments and thoughts that has gone through many conversations with Andrea and I is, and Andrea, you say it so well, we have to let kids fall in love with wrestling, whether it's a boy or a girl. And we can't demand that they pass the Navy SEAL test right away. So when Andrea was talking about this is a sport for so many girls that are, those 198, 100, 105 pounders, as well as those girls 160 and above. So many of them come in to the sport having, especially our upper weights, maybe even the lower as well, never having experienced being in sport before. And they certainly haven't had the trail of motor and movement experiences that boys have had through their life, just naturally, playing and roughhousing, etc. So I think we have to start re-looking at how are we coaching? How are we coaching boys and girls? How are we retaining them? Those are some really important keys. So when that room is a safe room, that means to me that everybody feels welcome. It's not focused on one or two top, individuals that are in that room, and the others just feel like, well, we're here. But, when was the last time the coach actually said something to us about our technique, or really started focusing on what we're doing in the room each day? So I think we just have to keep that welcome mat really wide open. I kind of thought about it today like that flashing blue Kmart light, that flashing light, it has to be open and welcome. I love referring back to a guy in Canada, and he said in the early days when they started having girls wrestling no longer became that sweaty, it's back there behind the boiler room, those hairy, gnarly guys in that room. All of a sudden, with women walking in, for the coaches, they got more support. Administration looked at them differently. Teachers looked at them differently. Everybody all of a sudden said, wrestling, girls and boys, wrestling. So I think a lot of those community pieces really help girls walk into a room and feel secure and feel like they can step in.
That's awesome. Coach Haggerty, you've done this with a lot of traditionally on the men's side.
Mm-hmm.
What were the keys to retention, and how did you make these athletes feel welcome?
Yeah, it was very interesting what Andrea said, and I'm going to parlay off of that a bit. Now, Andrea mentioned the fact how this sport offered opportunity for a lot of young athletes on the women's side that may not have been highly recruited in other areas, other sports. And I was thinking back to my opportunity when I was first sort of awakened to the sport of wrestling. It's much the same thing. The story is the same. That I didn't have a lot of football coaches recruiting me. I certainly didn't have a lot of basketball coaches recruiting me at 5'5", and so the opportunity and the door was there. So I think the initial that really sort of like rang a bell with me, and I hadn't thought that much about it when I'd asked the question earlier about our what really attracts women and girls to this sport. And I believe that that is so true, that this sport does offer for both men and women unique opportunities that maybe other sports can't provide for. To answer your question, Mike, when it comes to retention, I think that as long as one, there is that sense of family. I think that if somebody can believe that it is a safe environment, that they're much more willing to stay in the program. And if those expectations are not too high of any particular athlete coming in, that we have to nurture those first year, second year athletes. I've always had a belief that at some point, if you're in it a year or two, 3 years, that there becomes this time when there's a real buy-in. Like, I really want to be, I want more. I see how important and how great this is. The first couple years, you're sort of like finding your ways through it. And unfortunately, I think from the men's side, that we are overly aggressive with a lot of those athletes, and we turn them off in those first couple of years before they've really had an opportunity to feel like, hey, I am part of something that's bigger than me. I'm kind of willing to lay it on the line moving forward and become something great in this sport. And, overzealous coaches, overzealous parents, and those first 2 years scare these athletes away. And that, it's like too much, too fast. As a coach, I think I learned that over the years. I was probably one that was a bit overzealous in the beginning of my career, and talking about state championships. And you got Johnny in here sitting next to Jimmy, and he's there because Jimmy's there, and not necessarily to win a state title. So I'm hoping that maybe we can learn some things that we've failed on the men's side. And, this is just one of many things that we probably need to recognize, is that there's a real warming up to this community. And it's so new in a lot of different ways for everybody involved, that if our coaches and people that are in administrative roles are patient with this, I think it will continue to see this growth. That's my personal opinion. If I think that we have coaches or administrators or whomever that are overly aggressive with it, that we could, maybe fall back in some of those mistakes that we made with men's programs over the years. We don't have to repeat those mistakes with the women. Like, hey, be patient, understand that this is new, and give people opportunities to compete. But at the same time, the development is so important. The learning, the strategies, the techniques, the growth, all of that to me is really big. I had an opportunity to work with my son's program at William Jewell. They started their women's and men's program together 2 years ago. And working with the women, there were some gals in there that were really naive to the sport. They were second or third year wrestlers and hadn't had a chance to compete much at the high school level. How you treat those athletes, and your expectations with them is obviously different than a gal that's competed for 10 years and is ready to do some high-level competition. So to me, patience, understanding of building community and support is probably two of the biggest things, Mike, to answer your question, in my perspective.
Hey,
Andrea, is he on? Is he spot on?
yeah, you know, he's touching on something I've been thinking a lot about this year, which is as we talk about recruiting girls, retaining girls, um, we're recruiting a lot of first-time wrestlers right now. I mean, that's just kind of the place the nation is now. Obviously, we have some states like a Washington, a California, Tennessee, some of the other ones that have had girls' high school wrestling, longer than this growth of additional states. But we're still kind of in this phase right now where a lot of girls are trying wrestling for the very first time in high school. They're not finding wrestling younger. They're trying it, for the first time in high school. So I think that experience. What is the overall experience that we want any kid that walks into our wrestling door to have? What is the we're so, like kind of like what Mike was saying, we get so aggressive with, okay, who's on my roster and how many do I have at this weight, and maybe I should push this kid to drop down 2 weights, and what am I going to do with my duel? And we get very aggressive and fixated and focused there. But when we think about our team and serving kids, what is the experience of wrestling that I want them to have overall? Because they're going to forget about competitions. They're going to forget about some road trip. They're going to forget a lot of those win-loss things. And how many of those kids leave my program and leave the sport saying to themselves, wow, wrestling really is such a great sport. I had such a great experience. How do we help athletes have a good experience? By simply getting to know them as people. It still goes back to, how can I relationship build every day with my athletes? And I'm reading some books right now that kind of speaks to this. And the one simple thing that keeps coming back is just have simple conversation. Hey, what's your favorite music? Who's your favorite band? Cats or dogs? Do you have siblings? Are you the oldest? Are you the middle child? What's your favorite food? Where do you like to go when you spend your free time? Getting to know some of these, again, in the high school setting, we're always still talking about students. So getting to know them as people. What's your favorite subject? Are you struggling math? Okay, maybe you know this teacher. Having these simple conversations, getting excited about a kid learning a skill well in practice, just as excited about that as you are about, maybe a win in a match. Figuring out how to make connection as much as you possibly can with all the athletes in your room every day. So a kid who's never done a sport before, who's a beginner in wrestling, is like, wow, the head coach, talked to me today and asked me some questions and connected with me. And I think a lot of that is happening with girls wrestling right now because there's so many beginners. They can't just go right into the deep end right away. We got to, a lot of these coaches, I think maybe there's something refreshing right now about just being able to say, girls, you're all beginners. We just got to, it's maybe a reminder to coaches. It's 1% better every day. This is a highly technical and agile sport. Right up there with like gymnastics in terms of like the skill level and how long it takes to acquire a skill without any kind of pressure or live match situation. It takes a long time to craft a skill. Then we put them in competition, and then that's where we learn even more. It takes a long time to do things well in our sport. So we have so many new girls. I wonder right now if coaches are like, oh, it's so refreshing to coach these girls. They're so enthusiastic, and we're just working on basics, right? We're getting back to basics. But Mike, I think it still boils down to experience. What is the experience the girls are having right now? And I think it's really good because there's so much good energy. There's so much excitement, doing so many historical things, as I said. But I think about experience a lot right now, as I've heard of athletes that have left high school and they're like, I don't want anything to do with wrestling. And I'm like, why? Why is that? Whether it was a male or a female. Weight cutting was a big one. The pressure to cut weight, the making weight, the, not having healthy habits in that regard. I think just the constant grind, that the high school or collegiate season can be. But I think it still boiled down to overall experience. There was something that was lacking perhaps in feeling connected to teammates, feeling connected to coaches, and maybe things like weight cutting and stuff has something to do with that. But overall, the sense I got was they did not have just a generally good experience. And that starts with coaches.
It sounds like emotional intelligence for the coaches is a big piece of that. And when I say emotional intelligence, sometimes that aggressiveness, it kind of overshadows the ability to understand the goals of these kids, literally kids coming in. Hey, I want to be a part of a team. I want to be a part of a family. I want to be included. We in our family, we watch a lot of the shows, the crime shows. And the underlying theme was I started to hang out with a gang because I didn't have anything else to do or anywhere else to go. And I felt connected there. And so I did what they did. And so if I'm emotionally intelligent as a coach and I understand that all kids want connection, they want family, they want meaning, we can do that in the wrestling community if we're just aware of how to do that and how to listen to what they really want. Is that kind of what we're looking for?
I think we need to always hold a space for kids to recreate within our program. If the best thing that we're doing for that kid is giving them a place to be between 3 and 5 after school, and they're with a team, and they are expected to uphold the standards of the practice, and they are physically moving, and they are learning skills, and they're learning to be a good partner, and they're doing live wrestling in practice, and the coaches are excited to see them. It is enough and okay for it to just be that. If they're not kids that are going to be able to afford the time of the family, whatever the case may be, to get to competition, but we're still open to having those kids come in and participate, and everything isn't about competing and making varsity. I think we lose a lot of kids that way, that we might gain them if we slow roll them through our program, and maybe that kid is competing after the second year or the third year. But I would much rather a boy or girl come to practice and be there every day for an entire wrestling season if they're upholding all the standards of the practice, even if they never compete that year. Because that's the difference between them staying with us and leaving. I want them to stay. And what's, I think, often undervalued is sometimes that kind of person can be of such high value in the practice room. They're maybe a really good teammate. They say they're just good leaders. They're saying all the right things. You might have one who's got that great disposition. They know just when to keep something light, right? Like it's getting serious. They know just when to keep something light. Or they're really, really good at interpersonal skills, and they know how to handle the athlete that has one very specific archetype and then this archetype over here. And for whatever reason, this kid has just been given this God-given talent. They just are so good with people. Why wouldn't you want that person in your room? So I think I know in terms of experience and retaining kids, I encourage all coaches to hold a place in your heart, in your mind, and in your team for kids to come and just be an experience. And especially if they're new to your program, the competing and all those things will come together. I think if we're leading the right way in the wrestling room and we're making that connection with athletes.
One other thing I would throw in too, at this, because it has to do with either guys or girls, doesn't matter. As long as athletes are seeing growth, if they believe that they are moving forward, and if they're learning something either on an interpersonal level or whether it's technique or it's tactics in the room, if they feel like they're growing, they're likely to stay. Retention is higher. how to measure that, I don't know if we've had surveys or anything to, but anecdotally, being around programs where athletes feel like they're advancing, they're making, to speak to your point, Andrea, earlier when you mentioned um, technique and stuff, if those technical skills are being advanced and maybe they are not super competitive against another individual, but if those skills are being advanced in the room and they can take pride in those skills and they're getting maybe a little bit further down the ladder in regards to their own abilities, and they can feel that growth, and the coaches are encouraging that. Being an athlete-centered coach versus an outcome-based coach to me is huge, especially in this growth period. I just think that you can call it what it is, but if you're not in it for the athletes, and if you're not in it as from a coaching, I'm thinking coaching, right? But from the coaching perspective, it doesn't matter because eventually the goals will be met, and then they're like, "Oh well, that was good. I'm pretty much done with it." But if they feel like there's always growth in there and that they can get better, whether that's in your program or you're talking about in a high school program, hey, after you finish here, there's the opportunity to go on to college or international. And sort of paint that picture for them that there's a growth here, then I think it changes things a little bit.
I'm going to jump in and kind of maybe turn a different direction a bit and to tack on to Andrea, those community outreach, building that community within the wrestling program, community outreach, one or two things that team can do, even in the off season, to pull them together. I think I've heard some great coaches talk about things that they've done off that campus and out of that wrestling room. So I think that's another way to build that community. But I'm also thinking as I started writing about some of the questions here is where's the coaching mentorship? Where are the coaches reaching out to get that support? Are they? I know probably 4 years ago I talked with the executive director for the CIF in California over all sports, and I said, how many welcome coaches do we have? And he said, Joan, it's probably about 60%. So when you're talking about coaches not being on campus, not being at lunch and at break time with other coaches, having some after school or just a faculty, event where they can sit and talk a bit, I'm really curious at where we are able to build or help coaches realize how important it is to reach out and have one or two other coaches, whether it's in their section, their league, whoever they can connect with. And I think right now, as you both talked about it, it's get in, it's teach skills. Hey, we've got 2 weeks, we've got competitions coming up. There's so many demands now on those coaches, on their time, as well as the athletes. When do they have that time, and how can they build that coaching community to support them when they say, hey, I have 5 girls and they're all different weights, what are you doing? Do they have that? So it's, I'm just kind of throwing that out to all of you, some ideas for coaches to build their community for more support.
It's probably
we see that more, Mike. Again, I think everybody's got their opinions on this one, but I think you're right, Joan, and I wouldn't even question at all those numbers, 60%. But the non-traditional coaches are sort of the thing now in a lot of different ways, that they're not necessarily in the district. They may not have that opportunity to share lunch, and they may not be able to be more of a part of the school district itself. Mm-hmm. I think there needs to be a much more strategic approach for those individuals. I think that there needs to be a roadmap, because I've seen it, in our state and others as well, but where, coaches are hard to find. And quality coaches are super hard to find, and to bring them off of the streets to come in and run the program. Some of them are great with the X's and O's, but in regards to the actual development and growth of an individual and helping them along the way, they're not necessarily painted in that light of being educators, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, I think it has to be a much more strategic approach. I can tell you that there are some that have it because it's part of who they are. They're good at walking in and being that type of person that can create lessons in a short amount of time, not just techniques and X's and O's. But I think that it's easier for somebody that's in a traditional role to have that. They cross each other's paths in the hallway, like, hey, how's it going? Well, what'd you have for lunch today? Those simple conversations where you're connecting with your athletes to help grow. I would be curious too of what, Mike and Andrea, your thoughts are of what that strategic approach might be as we see more and more non-traditional coaches in both men and women's sports.
Sure. This is probably my selfish plug. I said we weren't going to do a commercial, but for coach education at USA Wrestling. When I started this job, I thought, I'm probably coming in to teach people, tell them what to do, how to do things. And my job over the last decade here has been about engagement, not about teaching a double leg or a single leg. It's about connecting people and getting them to understand things like three-dimensional coaching. The first dimension are the skills and the tactics and the strategies, but then the second dimension is motivation. How do you motivate and connect with these athletes? And then the third dimension are the values that you want these kids to walk out of your program with. And Mitch Hull and his brother kind of put me onto that in about 2015. And that's a cornerstone to our silver level coaches certification, is that three-dimensional online coaching course. So for $100, a little over $100, everyone that's come out of that course has said, I have a different philosophy now about coaching. And so having these coaches to outreach to us and say, I don't know what USA Wrestling offers. I don't know what I need to do, but put me in a pipeline and let me gain these skills and continue to grow as a coach, whether I've been doing it for 2 years or 20 years, that we can all grow through that emotional intelligence piece. Dr. Charlotte Bailey is Iowa's women's freestyle director. And, we've talked about how phenomenal she is. And she's been such an important part of my development as a coach educator. She just did her silver book report on the book called Sweat. And it's Success with Empathy and Trust. It's an emotional intelligence playbook for coaches of female athletes. And the book is called Sweat. And as she wrote that book report to understand how all of us can grow in learning about creating those relationships. And then another silver task that we just added was from Carol Grazer, and she's for the Stockdale Center for Ethics and Leadership at the Naval Academy. And she talks about that difference between mentorship and coaching, where mentorship is, I'll tell you some tips. I'll give you this. I'll give you that. Pete Gallia was a mentor of mine, and he gave me a lot of those tips. But he was also a coach for me because he listened to me, right? He went that extra step that mentors typically don't go beyond. And I think that's where that true engagement piece through, that we've seen through our coach education program. I mean, it's how I've met Andrea and Joan in this opportunity, in this role. I mean, Coach Haggerty, this is what you did when you were here in the 90s. And it's how we've gotten women's coaches together to share ideas so that they can get their programs to go from 8 girls to 24 girls in 2 or 3 years, and to have that patience and that understanding, that support that you need along the way. I'm going to shut up now because that's a lot for me to talk, and I don't like that. But Andrea, where do we keep going with that connection and that support for the coaches that are really out there buying in?
So, we were talking about the walk-on coach. The coach is not an educator in the school. This is something I relate to because I was a walk-on coach. And I noticed right away that the educator coaches in the program where I've helped in my community, their relationship with all the kids was drastically different. So again, getting back to relationship, drastically different, because as we're saying, when you're the educator coach, you can see your athletes walking through the hall, you can high five them, you can see, stop and ask a question, you can, if someone's not looking so good that day, that's your moment to stop and be like, hey man, what's going on? Or you have a female athlete that has a really, maybe she's never won in the state, there's a big match and stuff coming up, and you see her, and if she's feeling nervous, that's your little moment to talk to her about, staying focused on school, and we'll deal with competition and everything, when that time is right. So I also think that when you're the walk-on coach, not just that challenge of connecting with students, I didn't get the chance to connect with teachers. I didn't get the chance to connect with the good folks that are working in the cafeteria setting. I didn't get the chance to connect with the janitorial staff. I didn't get a chance to connect with the football coach. I didn't get a chance to connect with the office staff in the office. Because my goal was always, how can I get more people in this school to just come and want to be a part of us? And then the other thing that I was constantly thinking through was, there are women educators here that would be great on my staff. Somebody here is going to be so good at all of the admin stuff, the getting the buses, the helping with the schedule, the making sure we got all of our paperwork. There are people in that school that are going to be great. How can I get, if I'm a walk-on coach, how can I ask the athletic director or the principal, or if there's like a teacher lead, and say, I would like to have a meeting with all of the teachers and say, I need your help. Who would like to join? Who would like to join me on my my girls wrestling team, or my boys wrestling team, or my girl boy wrestling team? I need help. And no, you don't need to know wrestling in order to be on my staff. So, because there's too much talent in that school that could be putting that talent into my program, even though they are, non-wrestling people. So there's someone in that school, if I'm a walk-on coach, that's going to be able to help me with the admin stuff. There's another great athlete in that school that I could bring on my staff that can learn the sport of wrestling and help me with, and maybe they're really good at motivation, maybe they're really good at the team talk, maybe they're really good on the bus, maybe they're just a safe adult that I know can come with us and chaperone. So if I'm a walk-on coach, I think the thing that I learned was, I am going to need to make the effort, either through the athletic director, the principal, the vice principal, whoever the case may be. If there's a team lead for teachers, I am going to need to reach out to them and say, I need to bridge this gap between myself, where I work full time and then I come in. I don't get to roam the hallways. I'm not able to actively recruit. So that means I've got to get staff from the school to join my program, and they're those people. And that's if I was a walk-on coach, that's and if I find myself in that situation again, that's probably going to be the very first thing I do when I talk with the athletic director. How can you help me to form relationships with your teachers, your custodial staff, your cafeteria staff, so that I can recruit them to help me and be on my staff, and then they're the people that are connecting with the kids in the hallway.
Andrea, if our coaches don't hear anything else on this podcast other than that 3 or 4 minutes of a message, and I'm talking about guys or girls, doesn't matter, that message is loud and clear. And I think that is a perfect message to, even for some of our traditional coaches, to gather the troops and to reach out to your support team. Some of my greatest assistant coaches weren't that much in the wrestling world until actually I either went to them, or, I found specific skills that they were really good at, whether it's putting together a yearbook or whatever. But what you just said there is incredibly powerful. I hope that many of our coaches have a chance to hear that message. That was fantastic.
How often did the coaches come to you? They heard good things about the program from the kids. They heard that the kids were having a good experience. And then they walked to you and said, I want to volunteer. I want to help. How often have you seen that kind of happen the other way? And how accessible do we need to be as coaches? Do we need to have a Facebook page so people can volunteer? Like, how do we pull that in?
I don't think you can be an autocratic leader. I mean, certainly, and I'd love to hear what Joan and Andrea have to say, but if you're open, you can intimidate a lot of people in your program if you're the dictator and you don't want to have other people join in and be a part of this community. But collectively, I've seen whether they're programs that those that are out there that are just welcoming to everybody to join in and be a part of it. And then there's others that, hey, I'm run a tight ship and I do it my way and nobody wants to be a part of it. And some of those work for a while, but after a while you kind of burn people and you see those programs fade away where those ones that have that collective spirit tend to grow. So that's personally how I see it. But Joan, I know that's sort of like what that's your game, right? You're rallying the troops all the time.
Rallying the troops, and I love that Mike sent the piece from the young girl who said they handed her a piece of paper to join the team with her name on it. Now, when my girls were in elementary school, I learned very quickly working with PTA that you just couldn't send a flyer home in every kid's backpack because most of the time those flyers went in the trash or never got out of the backpack for 6 months. So you had to make that personal outreach. So, and again, thinking about this today, I thought that outreach is so important. Hey, can you come and bring a salad for the coaches? You know, this for the dinner, for the referees at the next tournament. Can you come help set up? You know, there's all these baby steps to getting people really involved in your program. And I say as a parent and as an individual for many years with a lot of different sports, we want to be involved for the most part. We want to know what our kids are doing. So you just have to continue to have that person-to-person conversation and build those relationships. And then, as we all know, those athletes that maybe never even won, you know, had a winning record, they loved the community. They loved what the sport gave them. And they're going to be the ones that give back in the future. They're the ones that are going to come out of the woodworks and say, hey, here's $2,000 for your program because it was so important to me and helped me build my career and what I'm doing today. So I think we cannot, as Andrea said, every athlete, we need to be able to touch every athlete with some type of conversation or getting to know them, however it works with us. But I think that outreach person to person is really important.
It
So
sounds like
oh, I'm sorry. I was just thinking maybe it's that parent support. Maybe it's your assistant coaches. Maybe one of them, that's their job, is to do that outreach. If you're a coach that really, and again, we have to be realistic. There's a lot asked. And if you are a walk-on coach, you've got another full-time job as well as maybe family. So we have to be realistic. And the more you can build that community around you of assistance and people that maybe that parent that hangs out every day the last half an hour of practice, maybe they really can help you in one way or another with the program. Maybe they've got the truck and they're going to carry the mats to the elementary school to put on an exhibition. I mean, there's just so many ways you can pull in and create that wrestling community.
it sounds like I don't have to do that now all on my own as a coach, right? I can
Hopefully.
have other people who I'm delegating to make the connection and the support.
Can we make
Correct.
2023 the year that coaches start to take care of themselves and
Mm.
realize that asking for help is a superpower, that
Yes.
rest, recovery, and stillness is a superpower?
You know,
Oh
that's
my
Instead of
God! Now we're
coaches
talking.
trying
Now
to
we're
be
talking. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
so here's the thing, kind of going back to, and the walk-on coach is such a great kind of tool when we think about the walk-on coach. You know, part of being a walk-on coach and kind of what my goal would be was to go and reach out to all these people. Our sport, it should not just affect wrestling people that want to come in the wrestling ring. I feel always a strong sense of our sport offering service to others. So, you know, one of the things I get really excited about when I meet non-wrestling people and I want to bring them in is because I want our sport to affect their life as well. So if I'm going to do my outreach to the teachers, to the custodial service, to the para-educators, whatever, part of my pitch to them is I want to affect your life. I don't want to just get something from you. I want you to join us. I want you to be a part of our family. And I want you to get some pretty big benefit to your life by being with us. And so as a coaching staff, then what are we doing to treat ourselves the way we treat our athletes? How are we helping each other with our mindset? How are we setting weekly goals as a coaching staff? This week's weekly goal is all about courage, thinking about courage, thinking about how do I have courage, or how do I not? Coaching staff, how are we all getting 8 hours of sleep this week? Coaching staff, everyone go and find some motivational I don't know, poem or story, and let's share that. Let's take 10 minutes to look over something and share what that means to us. We've got to start taking better care of ourselves as coaches. We're just trying to do too much. And I really think a strong leader creates leaders. So that look at all these people that I have brought in. I figured out they got some special talent or skill, and I've invited them in, and look at how well they're doing because we brought them into our sport, versus the coach that wants to hold it all, and they're doing it all themselves, and they're just stressed out and burned out and agitated, and they're not healthy. 2023 is the year of asking for help, bringing in non-wrestling people, figuring out what their talents are, bringing them in, affecting their lives, getting help, and raising mentors and leaders around you that are now they're just operating your program for you, and you get to coach and have fun.
And I would so much love to see that. I mean, what a great commitment that our coaches recognize how important that rest and recovery is. Mike knows that's where I spend most of my time working with individuals in that circle anyway. But to take that a step further is demonstrating as a leader that that's what you do as well, and if you can lead with example, and because let's face it, not everybody wants to be coached, right? And I'm not talking about our athletes, I'm talking about other folks in the community. But if you're leading by example, those that want that and will see that, recognize it, and that's how you live your life, and you're part of a successful program, all of a sudden that becomes very attractive to the outside world. So, I didn't think we would probably end up going down this path, but I think that was that's an excellent. I mean, to me, that's sort of the world that I've sort of carved in my own niche, and I think it's so important that our coaches understand that your rest and recovery. When you're intense, you're intense. When you're in the practice room, you work hard. When you're doing these, when you're in competition, you compete hard. But then that sympathetic parasympathetic balance is so important. And if you're not doing that, I think that's one reason we lose so many people. We lose coaches, we lose athletes, because we're in that drive mode way too much, way too often. What a fantastic message. I love it.
And how do we define success, right? If we're defining success as our team winning the state tournament, it's going to be a very tough 2023 because there's only one team that's going to win that title, and then everyone else is a failure, right? We can't exist in that mindset where if we're not number one, we're not anything. So what are some ways that you see successful programs define success overall that have been made it a healthier place for the community?
Well, I look at, I'm just thinking back to high school days for my daughters, the end of the year, celebrating the successes, of all those individuals on your team. To me, that's a great way to put the crowning, glory on the end of a season, is how the coaches handle that end of the season, whether it's a banquet or giving out awards or whatever that is. That's such a culminating event to set the stage for the next year, as well as define the success. So again, I think about this. Do coaches have that example? Where is that mentorship program that the coaches come from, where they understand how important that is? So again, there's that circle of support that is so needed in my mind to really help coaches say, hey, it's not just, well, we didn't have a successful season, oh well, but how are we preparing and moving forward to the next year and celebrating the successes of every athlete there?
Could that be evaluations? Last year we had 200 takedowns as a team, and this year we're at 230. So we're seeing the incremental progress. where our retention rate was 97% versus 20%. Like, how do we measure our team's health as a program overall? And I think that would be interesting. Is that an athletic director's job, is to help with those measurement standards?
That's an interesting
I think there's a
question, Mike.
place for athletic directors to survey students and ask them about their overall experience within the program, to ask them about whether this is a good place to ask whether they feel that is a safe place for them. I think it's a good place to ask, did that athlete believe that they received quality communication and attention from every coach in the program? I definitely think evaluating coaches should be a necessary part of every athletic department. And we have to give kids an anonymous way to share their thoughts, feelings, experiences after a program.
If I'm emotionally intelligent enough as a coach, is it okay for me to ask that of my team so that I can accept that feedback?
I think if you're not asking for that, then that's a red flag for me.
I agree.
If you are not, it's hard to be. It never feels great to be evaluated. I mean, we want to know, but we don't want to know, right? That ego wants to step in and defend against whatever is coming. But as coaches, so with the athlete, there's the training, right? And then we have pressure. We start building pressure. There's, really hard practices, and then we have live competition. And all this pressure, right, is to drive growth, right? So where do we as coaches get that same sort of kind of what is pressing us to grow and to evaluate and face some things about ourselves? Then once we know what we know, the question, maybe I find out something through an evaluation and I'm like, do I act like I didn't see it? Do I look at it and be like, okay, fine, well, I'm not going to change? Or do I say, okay, so how do I change this? Where do I go to get the information to change this? This is a conversation with my athletic director. It's always interesting when we're confronted with people's evaluations of us, what we do with that information. I think a strong person says, okay, I guess I better do some growing, learning, and changing.
I'm a huge believer that there is formal networks of evaluation and there are informal networks of evaluation. And I think that, you bringing in, the statistical information, it's all fine and good, but sort of on an informal basis, and which creates momentum, encouragement, etc., is even something as simple as at the end of a practice that you ask 5 athletes to make a quick statement about how so-and-so positively affected them during that particular practice. And then they have to say one thing positive about themselves that they feel like they grew during that practice and what they gained out of that particular experience. And I think you'd be surprised if you haven't done that, some of the responses that you get and how powerful some of those can be. Teammates that were, slugging it out during the competitive part of practice are willing to share, maybe at the end, the value of that experience and that they grew from it and that they were challenged in the moment, but they felt like, hey, this was something that was, a positive at the end of the day. So whatever that experience is, for people to have an opportunity to explore sort of that informal network of evaluation as you move through your season, to me is just as important. I've never been a person that believed that there's a tremendous amount of good with a one-time sit-down evaluation if there hasn't been an ongoing process during the entire season. If there's an ongoing process that feeds into that, then I think there's some value to it. But just to say, and I think this is in the business community as well, that if you just have that one sit-down meeting with your boss and they give you this summative exercise that they go through, and it's like, but were you really there to see me do my job? Or, and to me, if it's not accumulative during the season, if the athletic director isn't really involved, and I don't mean to throw any particular athletic director under the bus, but if they're not involved in the season, their value to me and what they have to tell me probably isn't that valuable. Nor is it in the same cause is if a coach pulls an athlete in and talks to them and sits them down and goes through this evaluation process, but they've never spoken to them during the season and they've never really asked them what's going on in their life. So I think it's all sort of like, I guess, reflective. So that's just my thought.
Mike, the thing I like about like the after practice kind of evaluation and feedback is that by consistently doing that, how much better the athletes then become at thinking through what feedback they want to give, what would be valuable. So I think through that, every day, if you do it at the end of every practice, I imagine that by about midway through the season, it must be really interesting to see how kids are now more fully engaged in that. How they communicate that probably gets a lot better. Must be very interesting to see that kind of just the growth, in that over the course of a season.
You will also be surprised. The one good thing about this, and sometimes it goes a little off tracks, but the one thing that it does do is that regardless of the practice, that you're ending on some statements of positivity, like you're ending the day with something that was important enough for somebody to spill their guts. Doesn't take 5 minutes total at the end of a practice to end the note or end the day on a note of high, as opposed to like, well, this practice sucked. It wasn't a very good one. The kids didn't get much out of it. All of a sudden, the athletes step up, and they may say that, like, I felt like I was dragging, but at least I was able to get through the practice and felt stronger, and I know I'm going to be better for it. Whatever that reflection is, I think that's a positive. So just, it is what it is.
Having that voice, boy, as an athlete, to have a coach really listen and not just tell me all the time. I always say there's 3 ways to communicate. I can yell, I can tell, or I can be the sage. And as I get older and gain more wisdom, I try to move more of my time into the sage and less of it into the tell and yell.
That's really good.
Yeah. Hey, who wants to talk about women becoming coaches?
Me, yes.
So, hey, maybe the feedback at the end of the season was, hey, I'd really like to have some women coaches. So that'll be our transition into a discussion about women in coaching. Because I would say as I kind of look at it, particularly again at the girls' high school space, we have all these athletes, all these girls coming in as athletes, right? And the constant conversation, obviously, is how do we fill coaching positions when we already have coaching shortages? And of course, it's like, well, you fill it with women, right? But we also realize that we have. We're maybe just now looking at a generation of women coming out of their national team, their college, that will be coming back in as coaches. So we don't, at the moment, have this deep pool of depth of women coming in and coaching, but I see that changing very much so in the near future. So how do we help coaches to get women to want to coach?
One thing that Taylor O'Donnell helped me a lot with this, because we were talking about getting more women to the Silver College.
Yeah.
And so, okay, well, let's market it, right? Let's make sure that they know about it, and let's send extra emails. And the numbers didn't grow. And Taylor says, well, think about the barriers that they have to get to that place.
Yeah.
Right. It's one thing for the dad or the husband, the male coach, to go to a coaching clinic because that's what they do. They leave the house. The wife takes care of the kids. And now if the wife wants to go to that coaching clinic, she needs to either get the husband's support to watch the kids, or she's going to have to find childcare. And there's just all these additional barriers to that opportunity that exist for women. And as we start to transition into getting them into that environment. So really understanding the root causes of why women aren't more able to do what they want to do, and finding ways to support them. Our Greg Strobel Leadership Academy is going to fund women to go to the Silver College this summer. So if you
awesome.
need childcare, now your money that would maybe go to paying us for the clinic can go to that childcare support. So now we can reduce one barrier to entry and get you there and get you that experience.
I think too, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joan and Andrea. I believe that as we see more women that are moving into these roles, that there will be the exponential growth, sort of somewhat what we've seen with the athletes. I think it will happen. You know, Clarissa starting out in Iowa now, and I think that she's such a dynamic person, and I think more people will look at her and say, I want to be that. I want to be able to do that. I want to be in a high profile program. I want to, so it creates vision. And as that vision grows within these young athletes, they see that as a possibility. I'm not sure 10 years ago they saw that as a possibility. And I think now that those times are changing rapidly. And, you know, Mike, again, we talked about this a little bit before we started on the broadcast. But the more that we can do at like USA Wrestling and with the coaches colleges and things to open the door, and that scholarship is big. I think that's really cool through the Greg Strobel scholarship, to get more gals actively into these roles. And then, you know, they see those avenues, they see what it takes to get there and how to get there, and maybe help expedite that process. But I'm encouraged by that.
I was speaking with my daughter, Catherine Shy, recently, and she just made one sentence that made so much sense to me. And it was basically girls entering the coaching world, women entering that coaching field are facing the same doors closed, partially open as they did trying to get into the wrestling room to put their shoes on and move forward. So it's kind of like, you know, here we are, we're moving forward and gaining the numbers and girls stepping on the mat to compete. And now we have to start that process over with the women. So I look at it, and I've said this many times, I think we need to have this women's college ambassador program. And I just kind of threw that out today as I was typing, just thinking, okay, what do we need to call this? But I came from coaching university level women's gymnastics. I know the challenges there and the time it takes to do that as a college coach. But I really feel if we can hand the college coaches here's a menu, but here's the information that your athletes need to have. I've said for many years, the women that have gone through and competed at the college level, they are freestyle wrestlers now. They are going to bring freestyle wrestling back into our high school programs. They're going to bring freestyle wrestling back into our club programs. They are going to be the ones that bring that in. We need to have some menu, some program that at least the coaches can say, hey, here it is. We need to get you with your USA copper or bronze card. You know, can that be part of, you know, being in college right now? Is there some fund that, you know, the college can put forward to help them do that? They need to be officiating. They need to be, the college coaches need to say, hey, you need to go put on this clinic. Well, coach, I'm not the best wrestler here. I haven't won much. No, you have the ability to go out and do a high school clinic. You have the ability to go out and talk to high school young girls at this program that's just getting started and help them know the steps that you went through, the hardships you went through. There's so many ways of a college ambassador program can start spreading the word throughout all the states. When they go back home, are they going to their high school, you know, club or their high school program? You know, are they there reaching back out? And I think our college coaches are the ones to set that pace and to set that expectation that these young ladies are our pioneers. They're the ones that are there. They're our college ladies that are going to move that forward. And even if they don't decide to coach later on or get involved, down the road they will. But I think we just need to have something for the college coaches to support and give an awareness of what the ability that these young ladies have to make an impact on girls wrestling across the nation. And I just would like to see, Andrea, you know, you want to do that. We need to have that. It needs to be put together. I know how Andrea's brain goes. She's going to be going,
am I putting that together? Sure.
I've already put this together. you know,
I'm gonna hit the
already
road right
knocked
now,
out
and I'm going from college to
No.
college.
It's done. It's done. But I just, you know, and that's me as a college coach going, I took my young ladies out. We hauled equipment. I learned to back a U-Haul. We loaded equipment. We went to this high school. We went to that high school to support girls gymnastics. We did exhibitions. You know, we were out there. We did Special Olympics. So my athletes had a lot of experiences as being leaders, and a lot, are coaches and still judging and doing those things in their lives now. So I feel like we have just a platform to really create a program for these young ladies to know how important and how valuable they are, whether they are, they've had a winning season or not. Every one of them has so much value to give back to their states and their high school programs, clubs, etc.
That platform has been built and supported so much by the work that you two and so many other female leaders in our sport have gone to so many lengths to provide for us. So thank you for that.
I have one final question. Okay, and I know
Final?
we talked about final question for me.
Is there a prize?
Mike,
Wait, is
you
there a
guys may
prize?
have more questions. I'm going to go play with my grandbabies here in a little bit, but my question would be this: if you were to offer up a grade card for where we're at and our processes and what we're doing with women's wrestling, you can score it however you want, and then maybe a commentary on why the grade that you would offer of what we're doing with women's wrestling across the board. Where is women's wrestling, using an A, B, C, D, E, and F, which and we don't have to go down there, but certainly where are we right now with a grade card, and tell me why.
Well, Joan is a retired educator. I don't know. Were you a tough grader, Joan?
I would need to have some time to create a rubric.
Okay.
I love it. That's fair. That's totally fair. Mike, I guess inside of this very short rubric, I would define the rubric as a measurement of the growth and the stability of women's wrestling. That's as good as I can build the rubrics right now.
Growth and stability. Oh my goodness.
Well, growth. I mean, we just have the data to prove the growth. I'm just trying to think how to look at this. I'm very interested in getting some more data to say if our hydration numbers in state A were 400, and at the end of the season they were really, another database showed only 200, what's happening there?
Yeah.
So, and again, we have a lot of young ladies stepping into that mat room that, have not had a lot of athletic experience. So, and again, we've talked all about the coaching situations and building those relationships and retention. So growth, amazing, phenomenal. It's new. We're attracting young ladies just everywhere. Coaches are doing a phenomenal job. The grassroots people, just hats off like 30 times to all the grassroots people that are making it happen. So I think that's, an A+. But here's what I still think. As I sit here and I think about all we're doing and the growth, and we look at this, fast flowing river of social media about girls wrestling. If you're on those sites, it's right there. That's what's coming at me every day. But honestly, I could wear wrestling, grow girls wrestling hat, light splashing, and I could walk out and nobody would say a word. So and where am I going with that? I know women's wrestling is going to create a bigger, wider based community of people that will learn about our sport, that will be interested about our sport, that'll want to know about our sport. So I think we still got a lot of work to do to really create that, get wrestling to be able to be a more community, well-known sport. We're still that smaller sport kind of behind the boiler room sometimes.
And
in so
that
many
was
places.
totally an educator's response, because we see all this growth and we're doing all of these great things, class, but we still have a ways to go. I absolutely love that. That was fantastic. Andrea,
We
your
do.
thoughts?
Oh man. Um. Okay. I'm gonna. One thing I'm really excited about is that when you looked at media coverage of girls high school wrestling or even girls youth wrestling, maybe a decade ago, the article was always girl in a boy's world. She's just one of the boys.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, when you look at high school coverage or even, our senior world team, whatever, they're getting treated like the athletes, the amazing athletes that they have always been. I love what the articles are saying right now. Who are the top three, contenders for this weight class at state? This dual team for girls is so. One of the things I'm really excited about is just how we are being talked about in media right now. I also think we still have areas of our media, our wrestling media even, that still has a ways to go in how we commentate women's wrestling, how much color and background we're doing on women when commentating has happened. So I think there's some things in media that are going to need improvement. But I really, really like how our young female athletes and our older female athletes are now being discussed as athletes, and they're being discussed in terms of competition and readiness, and I just like how we're finally getting covered in that way. I'm as far as like growth, A++. I mean, we're the athlete numbers are exactly what Joan and I believe they would be if high school coaches welcomed all girls into a wrestling room. So a lot of the really cool things that are happening out there, we knew that would happen when coaches became inspired to start girls programs, when coaches that were already advocating for girls when they started getting more support. We knew when a girls championship became official in a state that things were going to start taking off. And what's very exciting right now is for many states, it just started with the girls championship, but now the discussion is classifications and, changing the postseason qualifiers are starting to get more competitive and more tight. And this is exactly what you want your varsity sport to be. We want girls high school wrestling as an official varsity championship sport. We want girls that are competing in wrestling that also compete in track and field or cross country, where their varsity experience across all sports is compatible. And wrestling is really starting, and for girls high school wrestling is really starting to move in that direction. So that's an A+. Let's see. Coaching women. I'm gonna go B-, but moving into a B, because we've got coaches that are like, forget it, I'm doing it, I'm jumping in there, and they're learning and they're making mistakes and they're getting better and they're figuring things out and they're getting a renewed sense of purpose because they're coaching girls, and how that experience coaching girls is now affecting the way they're coaching boys and how they're teaching skills, and they're getting better. But I'm not ready to give them an A yet. I want more from them because they're capable and they're totally amazing. Okay, so let's see what else. As I look at world team and a national team, I was just at the World Cup with my husband. We had a romantic getaway to Iowa because that's what we like to do. I can't tell you how A++ it was to see United World Wrestling and the powers that be, or whoever decided to have Women's World Cup right alongside the Men's World Cup. It was absolutely outstanding. So that's an A+. I don't know. Everything's pretty good. No one's getting a C, although C's do get degrees, but
Very good. Well said. And I just expressing what Mike said, we're in a very fortunate time that we have leaders like yourself, Andrea and Joan, you guys leading the charge. The wrestling community is blessed to have you guys doing what you're doing out in front, leading this effort and trying to create more and more exposure and creating opportunities. So we're fortunate, and certainly the ladies of this era are very fortunate to have you out leading the charge and opening these doors and helping make things happen. We couldn't be in a better time. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you. It's been awesome.
Yeah. And again, Mike, anything else to add in regards to coaches education? Anything that you can think of before we have a quick sign off?
I appreciate so much the perspective that I've gained in my job, having the opportunity to work with the female leaders in our sport. It's made me better at what I do across the board. And so for anybody that we haven't mentioned on this podcast that has been there, that has helped me to grow, thank you. I just too many to name and not recognize on this, but I'm so blessed.
Yeah, thanks again.
I think one of the, sorry,
go ahead,
Mike.
Joan. No, go ahead.
I think one of the great things right now is the groups of women that are working, whether it's D1, Wrestle Like a Girl, Andrea and myself, other women's age group council. We're all working together to collaborate to really move everything forward as a really strong team. The Women's Summit that we had, which brought in, all the different groups involved in wrestling, last spring. This is so important. Instead of it, kind of starting in little pockets here and there, we are all really supportive of each other's efforts and all working together and collaborating with the information to make it as smooth a journey as possible. So, and the other thing I'd like to throw in as an educator that's done so many clinics and gone to so many conferences over the years. So all the coaches listening to this, boy, there's been some great information shared. Pick one or two things, and if you can just implement one or two. Sometimes we get overwhelmed, and I've gone to so many conferences where I went, oh man, this is great. And you come back and you just kind of go, ooh. So just picking one or two things that really kind of hit in a place that you feel like you can implement, I think is a great way to do it. So thank you all for having us.
Oftentimes we've had so many, different guests on the podcast, and again, I will offer our our place in this space with our coaches council. If you guys need anything, please feel free to reach out to our USA Wrestling Coaches Council. They are the ones that, ultimately sponsor this particular podcast. And so if you guys in any way, shape, or form need our assistance, Zach Dominguez, who is our chairperson at this particular time, please feel free to reach out to us, and we would be happy to help in those ways. So again, I guess by the time people hear this podcast, it will be probably after the holiday season. So but I will still go ahead and wish everybody, and I hope that they're having a great holiday season at this particular time. So until next time, for Mike and myself, we certainly appreciate you joining in on this particular broadcast and this particular podcast with Joan and Andrea. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, and we look forward to talking to you guys soon.